So I'm going to talk about my life and a little bit about my background, but I want you to take away 3 things by the end of my talk, and probably by the end of this session. You know, one of the most important things as entrepreneurs is to be a risk taker. The second most important thing is to be an innovator, and to be both of those things means you have to be a lifelong learner. And what's interesting about my story is I've encapsulated all of those things to be able to be a serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. But my story really begins probably because of my father, who influenced my life. He was really a rocket scientist, so he encouraged us as kids to be risk takers and entrepreneurial and innovators. And it often resulted in me getting kicked out of school. So being who he was a propulsions engineer, and so he built the propulsion systems for the Apollo program. So you can imagine the toys and the games we got to play with them. One was how to build a grenade, which today would make me a terrorist probably, but as a kid we'd go into school and we'd build rockets and we'd blow up classrooms, and my dad would encourage us to continue to do that. Of course, my technology is broken. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. I'm fine. I used to be in the Marine Corps, so I know how to project myself. So I had this early on experience in school, and it's ironic that I've spent most of my life in the learning space, in education space, because I did get kicked out of school. I was hyperactive. I was the worst student you could imagine in a classroom because I constantly was throwing things, blowing up things. And so one of my teachers said, never come back to this class until you've run for 3 hours. So she was the person who encouraged me to take up marathon running. So literally every morning I would get up before I'd go to class and I'd run. I started out running a mile, then 2 miles, and then pretty soon I was like Forrest Gump. I was running about 13 miles a day, and then I'd sit in the classrooms like a zombie because I was exhausted. And I finally made it through school. In fact, I ended up finishing school early, and by the time I was 16, I went to Berkeley to go into pre-med. So I went there, and unbeknownst to me, I had a gift in mathematics because I constantly was kicked out of that class, so I didn't know if I knew math. But I ended up running out of money, and so the Marine Corps knocked on my door and said, hey, you have this skill that we need. And so I hate to admit it, but this was under the Reagan era, so now you know how old I am. So I went on into the Marine Corps, and my job at that time was to be Google Earth before there was Google Earth. So I had to sit around and do mathematics and try to figure out where nuclear silos in Russia were. And at that time, we didn't have very many clues. We'd get pictures from the CIA or whoever and then try to reverse engineer where these things were. And I didn't know then that I would be leveraging that technology in my future self or in my future life. But at that time, I really hated my job, not because it wasn't doing something that was important. I wanted to, when I joined the Marine Corps, I thought I'd run through the jungle with my M16 and have fun running around with a gun and shoot at things. But that's not what I had. I sat in a dark room just doing math all day. So my job was pretty boring. And it's interesting that I still kind of do the same job. But so I have to run a lot before I go to work. So I was really good at this job, but I continued to run, and I was running marathons for the Marine Corps, and I was getting prepared to go to the Olympic trials, and I actually found that I was pretty good at this thing, thanks to that teacher in my past. But when I went out for a run one day,